welcome to the final episode of Avanade's series, Imagine What You Will Do with AI. It's such a pleasure and a privilege to have Tony and Fergus here today. We're going to have a very exciting conversation about Agentic AI. I can't actually think of a better topic actually to end our series with. So Tony, Fergus, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. So hi, my name's Fergus Kidd, and I work as our research and development engineering lead. So get to play with a lot of the new tech, of which agents is one, and we've been playing with for a few months.
And I'm Tony Hinckley. I've been with Avanade for 14 years, and during that time I've done a number of roles, still an engineer at heart, and I am proud to be our Chief Technology Officer for the UK.
Very, very exciting. So I think without further ado, let's just dive in to this fascinating topic. So particularly over the last couple of months, there's been a lot of talk about AI agents. So kind of, as Gartner would say, semi-autonomous software entities, and obviously agentic workflows, everything from Salesforce's Agentforce. I just love the name, so I had to mention that. NVIDIA's Jensen Huang the other day said that the IT department in the future would actually become the HR department for AI agents. And of course, the market is supposed to grow, I think, at a compound annual growth ratio of 45% for the next 5 years. How do you define agentic AI and agentic workflows? Do you agree with the statement from Jensen? Let's just dive into some definitions and how you see it, first of all.
Yeah, I think I would even simplify the definition, right? We're coming from a place where we've been talking a lot about generative AI and large language models and products like GPTs. Those generate things. When we're talking about agents, we're talking about doing things. I think that's the big difference, is going from generating to doing. And how we do that is using, we use semi-autonomous software entities. But what do we really mean by that? We just mean that we're giving them access to data, we're giving them access to APIs or systems so they can actually take action and make decisions.
And I think another angle is that we're thinking around generalist systems, systems of interaction, LLMs, and specialist systems. And I like to use a bit of an analogy. So if you cast your mind back about 150 years to Charles Darwin, one of the things that lots of people recognize him for is his work around, survival, the species and evolutionary biology. But if you look at his notebook, it turns out that he was actually a prolific pen pal. Oh, wow. So in his network globally, had something like 230 pen pals who he wrote to on a regular basis.
I never knew that.
And these were specialists in their field around chemistry, around biology, around different aspects of science and nature. And when he was forming his theories, if you look in his notebook, he's actually cut and pasted, using the technology of the time, which was literally something sticky in a piece of paper,
scissors,
into his notebook, all of these different direct extracts from these 200 some people that he was talking to on a regular basis. And it's that digitization of 150 years worth of how do people solve problems that we're now starting to see. So a human interacting with a group of different technical specialists and generalists to form their own answers and opinions to the problems they need to solve on a daily basis.
Absolutely fascinating. I love both of those analogies, and thanks again for cutting down the complexity as well. Part of the value that AI agents can unlock obviously comes from that ability to actually automate a range of complex use cases which have highly variable inputs, outputs. This is obviously traditionally it's been very expensive. Where do you see the most value coming from? And I guess, how do you see this value developing across a kind of spectrum?
I think it is a spectrum. I think if we look at the kind of spectrum from an individual user or an individual employee, if you want, or worker, it's not strictly agentic AI, but the way that I'm interacting with AI in terms of tools that help me code as a developer, that help me test code, write documentation, that I'm interacting with as if it were another software engineer, right? As if it was someone co-programming with me or helping me with documentation. has completely changed in the last year, and especially the last few months. The way that I work with code and develop code has completely changed. Now, in a world where time is money, that is adding value to me, because there's a lot of tasks like testing and documentation and things that I don't necessarily want to spend all my time doing, that I can do very, very quickly. But then I would say that sort of scales right up, right?
Yeah, and doing all of those things as well. And I think this is great because we've seen gaps in how maybe developers were focusing on documentation and testing in the past that
or not.
we're starting to see definite improvements in that space. But at the other end of the spectrum, you've got organizations that are reimagining the way that they organize themselves and build themselves in some instances around AI. So one that springs to mind, been working with Mangata for a year and a half or so now. And they are really taking this from an AI first mindset. So the problem that they're trying to solve is a global scale problem around how do we bring edge computing and connectivity to all parts of the globe. So satellite connectivity is a big part of their proposition, but the way that they have designed their processes and their systems is around autonomous or semi-autonomous decision making at the edge. And so put yourself in a situation where we've got a compute device in the middle of a rainforest or a desert, and something is not behaving as you would expect it to behave on that box. Now you've got a couple of options. You either send an engineer into the middle of nowhere with all of the technical prowess to try and solve that problem, or you use AI to identify the signals that say something's not right here, compare it against a set of known interventions that it can make, address that problem in very close to real time at the edge, and then notify the rest of the ecosystem that it's had to make that intervention, so that at some later point in time a person can get involved if they need to. And that's a totally different way of imagining the problem. So at one end, taking an existing process or problem and motivating it to a new level through use of technology and AI, and at the other end, just starting with AI by default and then putting humans in the mix where they really add value.
Absolutely fascinating. I think that partnership with Avanade, Microsoft and Mangata is also a fantastic example of creating new digital backbones. So I read a while ago that only 20% of the world's use cases have been possible with the digital backbones that we have today, and now we're obviously exploring, in this example, for instance, edge computing, low orbit satellites, to actually realize some of our ambitions that we just haven't been able to realize before. So how should business leaders prepare for the age of AI agents, and how can we really put, I guess, the power of agentic AI into their hands and still make sure that we're maintaining that accountability and orchestration?
I mean, we've done a lot of work ourselves internally, and I think it's often important to look at us as a bit of a use case. We are a company full of technical people. The work that we do is quite technical, and so we are early adopters, so client zero for Microsoft on a lot of this technology. And we've taken a very intentional approach to how we experiment, implement, and then roll out this type of tooling and technology to our workforce. So looking at specific use cases, departments, demographics of users, testing and learning in those environments. And some of that is technology, rolling out the technology, but there's a lot of it which is around doing that in a responsible and ethical way. And we've done quite a lot of work in building out a framework for how we do that.
So yeah, we put a lot of effort into looking at the digital ethics and where we implement these systems, right? Who are the decision makers? Who's responsible for those decisions? Are they business leaders? Are they technical people? And I think a big theme for this year will be human in the loop. We're looking a lot more about how agents work with humans and how different pieces of AI can put the human back in the loop to actually make better decisions or more well-structured decisions, and have a bit more accountability to make sure that we're really doing this in the right way.
Fantastic. And you've partially answered my next question about who do you see in the organization being involved in these kind of decisions? Who's going to decide how we're going to build out those agentic workflows or frameworks? And also, who's going to decide about the data that we're using here?
And I think I use the phrase quite a lot, so those that know me, I apologise in advance for you hearing this again, but relatively speaking, the technology is easy and the people are hard.
Yeah.
So as we look at how we're rolling this new technology out, and bear in mind this is only a couple of years old that this technology has now really been establishing itself as viable to use. We have to really think about the human impact and the rate of adoption and the impact that this technology has on people. So really this has to start from the top. And we're engaging with senior decision makers inside of businesses in the mid-market and beyond to look at how they do this responsibly, how they do this with their people, and looking at value creation as much as productivity and cost reduction. We think that that's a really important consideration, and it has to be done with business leaders. It kind of starts at the top.
I think there's another angle to that as well, which is if businesses are kind of sticking their head in the sand and not coming up with how we're actually going to tackle AI and agentic AI, employees are going to be doing it anyway. There's consumer tools out there that
be a shadow Gen AI.
Exactly. So I think if you don't have a business strategy around this stuff, you need one just to understand how your employees are using it, even if you're not ready to kind of transform your business around it.
And if I might build on that, actually, I think the angle that tends to get lost quite a lot is your end customers are using this technology. It's appearing on their phones. And we had the recent in the news the scandal around Apple rolling out their Apple Intelligence and it producing summaries of articles that were produced by the BBC. So this is AI interpreting data right in the hands of your customers. So when you think about how AI is going to be adopted, you've got your organizational view, you've got your employee view, but you have to have the customer in that lens as well, because their expectations around how they'll use these tools is just continuing to evolve. In 2 years' time, graduates that are coming out of university and working at your company will have been used to using AI tools for nearly 4 years. Part of their personal workflow will be this AI first mindset. And you have to have a strategy, because if you don't, you can guarantee there's a disruptor or a competitor out there who does.
Fascinating. So, Fergus, I get very excited about a multi-model approach. I see immense opportunity here, and a portion of our clients are also small mid-market, so revenue between 500 million, say, to 5 billion, which means sometimes they might have smaller budgets. So how can we be as strategic and mindful about topics like cost, for instance, when we're building up these kind of workflows? And I guess also creative, just with the kind of models that we're leveraging to achieve those ambitions.
Yeah, so it's a really great point. I think everyone has been really focused on the large language models, the big cloud scale deployments. And they're really great for some use cases, but in a lot of use cases that are actually need addressing today, we can use small language models, we can use small vision models, and as you said, multi-model setups. So we need language models talking to vision models, talking to decision-making models. But what has kind of fundamentally changed to allow this is that all of those models are using human language. So because of the innovations around large language models and the way that they use text and language, we no longer need to kind of translate the things we're saying for machines to understand us. We can just use human language. As an example.
So what's this?
So this is a Raspberry Pi, and we have the Phi 3 models from Microsoft. So small language models, which have really good performance for certain topics and
also
tasks.
More secure.
Yeah, exactly. And we can have the models running on a device like that. So often when we think, and you see and you read in the media about sustainability issues around generative AI, and therefore it will be around agentic AI as well. Well, actually, there's some use cases and models where we can have running on devices as small as this, we know when they're in use and when they're not in use, and we know what their power consumption is, and we have a lot more control. And we can put them in interesting and cool places as well, especially when we think about 5G networks and satellite networks.
Yeah, and I think the sustainability piece is important. We need to keep that in mind. We're seeing that with some of these small language models and small vision models, not only are they cheaper to run and using less energy, but they're actually giving better results, or results that are good enough in a fraction of the time. And then the other thing is that kind of device, so that's a slightly older Raspberry Pi, think of that, we now have that in most people's pockets. So most people today are carrying around a smartphone that has more computing power than NASA used to put the first men on the moon. And so we can start to think about where that processing happens. Does it happen in our business, in a cloud data center, or does it happen directly on our end user's device? We can think about security, because the data actually stays in the domain of the user, so their data is being processed locally, not having to round trip to the cloud. And when I'm training these models, data is so important. The quality of data and the data that we need to train the models is so important. With a smaller specialist model, you actually only need a smaller amount of data. And security has to be on everybody's mind. I know that Satya's been talking about it at Build conferences and Ignite conferences all of this year, that if I have a small model with a smaller amount of data, that's a smaller security risk as well. If somebody does manage to penetrate the model in terms of getting access to it, the threat is actually significantly smaller in this state. So a series of these least privilege models running inside of the estate has lots and lots of net benefits.
Huge potential. So I think particularly over the last couple of years, with the platform shift and the opportunities to leverage much more transformative technology, we've seen great possibilities with regard to hyper-personalization. We've almost seen a kind of a shift in expectations in our customers from expecting maybe a minimum viable product at the beginning to really a minimum lovable product, just because of the hyper-personalization that we can actually enable and achieve now with partially with technology. So I think my last question for you is, how does Agentic AI contribute to that? How does Agentic AI enable us to be even closer to our customers?
Yeah, I think there's a literal answer, which is,
oh, wow.
If we look at another toy, if we look at this headset device, so this is a real wear headset. Essentially what this is doing is giving me access to a screen, a voice interface, so I can kind of explore different interfaces through this vision piece here, explore different business applications. It could be about getting information about guides if I'm maybe fixing something. Now today, these are used for things like remote assist, so getting experts in my ear if I was doing a job I was unfamiliar with.
I mean, that's pretty close to the customer, having an expert in your ear.
Literally on top of their head, right? And it could be, the customer could be wearing these, or the customer could be somebody actually facing somebody wearing these. Like, there's all sorts of different scenarios. But it doesn't necessarily have to be connected to a person. We can connect these to agents and make the person wearing a device like this in the field out there an expert in what they're looking at or what they're talking about. We've got camera devices in here. This model's actually got a thermal camera in it as well. So there's a whole host of information that we can use it, send back to agents who are experts in their field, and then make me the expert as well.
And I think this is really important, and the form factor is going to continue to evolve. We've seen Meta have been talking about their new hardware that will come at some point in the future. I don't think we've got any confirmed timelines for it, but it's bringing access to these kinds of experiences to a set of end users that historically have really struggled to get first-class access to this type of technology. Now, we're working in offices on laptops with monitors and screens connected to the cloud, and we've been quite used to having access to tools like Copilot and large language models and big data analytics and those kinds of things. But if you are standing on the top of a wind turbine off the North Shore of the United Kingdom, if you are a remote worker with occasional connectivity, you've always been way down the pecking order in terms of access to this technology, but still critical to the success of the company that you're working for and the outcome for your end users and clients. So this is really exciting in terms of changing and leveling the playing field for those frontline workers and field workers.
Really a game changer for inclusive design as well. Yeah. Well, what a galactic conversation. Fergus, Tony, it's been such a pleasure. I'm very energized by our conversation, energized for the next couple of months as well with our clients exploring these kind of topics. And to all of our listeners, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for listening, and hopefully see you all soon.